April 16, 1947, Texas City, Texas. 9:12 in the morning. The fire on the French freighter has been burning for about an hour, long enough that crowds gather at the docks to watch. School children climb onto a high school roof half a mile away. Office workers press their faces to windows. Photographers from the Houston paper set up tripods on the pier. The smoke is orange-brown and oddly beautiful, the kind of color a normal fire doesn't make. It rises in a column straight up into a clear blue sky. People lift cameras. They take pictures. At 9:12 in the morning, the SS Grand Camp ceases to exist. The blast registers on seismographs more than 1,000 miles away. Two small planes circling above are torn out of the sky in pieces. Windows shatter across the bay in Galveston. The ship's anchor, a piece of iron weighing more than 3,000 pounds, travels a mile and a half inland and buries itself in a field. Before the disaster ends, at least 581 people will be dead. It's the deadliest industrial accident in American history. Most people have never heard of it. This is one of those stories that almost didn't survive, buried by court orders, sovereign immunity, and a country that wanted to look forward instead of back. If you want to see the next one we pull from the archive, hit subscribe. Now, back to it. Texas City sits on the western shore of Galveston Bay, about 40 miles southeast of Houston. In April 1947, it was a working port of roughly 16,000 people. Oil refineries, a tin smelter, a sprawling Monsanto chemical plant, a long stretch of docks called the Texas City Terminal. The kind of place where the work and the weather and the sky all smelled faintly of oil and salt water. The war had been over for less than 2 years. American factories that had spent 4 years making explosives for the Army were quietly retooling. One particular product was still pouring out of those plants by the boxcar load, a substance called fertilizer-grade ammonium nitrate, FGAN. For short, it had been developed during the war as a domestic alternative to imported fertilizer. It was manufactured at federal ordnance facilities, the same plants that, until recently, had been making the chemical in its other form as a component in military explosives. By 1947, the United States had found a new use for it. Europe was starving. Crops were failing across France and Germany. Thousands of tons of American ammonium nitrate were now being shipped overseas as agricultural aid, part of the post-war relief and fertilizer export programs that preceded the formal Marshall Plan. That's what the SS Grand Camp was loading on the morning of April 16th, 2,300 tons of FGAN bound for French farmland. The bags were 6-ply paper stamped with the manufacturer's mark. They were warm to the touch. None of the longshoremen thought much of it. What they didn't know, what almost no one outside a handful of Army Ordnance offices knew, was that the warmth was part of the substance itself. FGAN was ammonium nitrate prills coated with a mixture of petrolatum, rosin, and paraffin wax. The coating was meant to keep the bags from clumping in humid weather. Under fire conditions, it was something closer to fuel. The Grand Camp was a French-flagged Liberty ship, one of the mass-produced cargo vessels the United States had cranked out by the thousand during the war. She had taken on most of her cargo the day before. Stevedores were finishing the last hold. Somewhere in the bottom of that hold, no one ever established exactly where, a small fire began. The first wisp of smoke was spotted around 8 in the morning. A longshoreman noticed it coming up through the hatch covers. A foreman went down to look. Someone tried a gallon jug of water. 2 men used handheld fire extinguishers. The smoke kept coming. The captain ordered the hold sealed and steam pumped in to smother the fire, a standard procedure for a shipboard cargo blaze used at sea for decades. He gave specific instructions that water not be used. Water would ruin the cargo. Steam could smother an ordinary cargo fire. Ammonium nitrate was not ordinary cargo. It supplied oxygen to the reaction, and the added heat may have made the hold more dangerous, not less. By 8:30, smoke was pouring out of the hatch in colored plumes. Yellow, orange, a strange peach color shifting darker by the minute. The Texas City Volunteer Fire Department arrived. 27 men with hoses and hand pumps. They climbed onto the dock and began spraying water onto the deck of the ship. The crowd grew. The Grand Camp was tied up at the main pier in plain view of half the town. Workers walked over from the Monsanto plant on their morning break. Children watched from the high school down the road. Photographers set up cameras. Dock fires were a familiar sight in Texas City. People came to watch them the way they came to watch storms. The smoke, by now, was visible from 20 miles away. The captain of a nearby ship, the SS High Flyer, watched from his own deck 2 slips over. His holds also held ammonium nitrate, about 1,000 tons of it, plus 2,000 tons of sulfur. He noted the smoke in his log. He did not order an evacuation. At 9:12 in the morning, with 27 firefighters on the pier and several hundred onlookers within blast range, the Grand Camp's cargo finally went. What happened in the seconds after 9:12 has been reconstructed from photographs, seismograph traces, and the accounts of the people far enough away to survive. Its hull tore open in a column of flame that rose more than 2,000 feet into the air. The blast wave moved outward at the speed of sound, flattening the Monsanto chemical plant a quarter-mile away in a single pulse. Of the roughly 450 people inside that morning, around 145 died. The volunteer firefighters at the dock were vaporized. Of the 27 men who had answered the call that morning, 26 were killed where they stood. Most were never recovered in any identifiable form. The pier where they stood was reduced to splinters floating in the slip. The crowd of onlookers was sized by flying steel, bolts, hatch covers, lengths of chain moving at hundreds of feet per second. The 2 small planes circling above the dock, flown by sightseers who had taken off from a nearby airfield, fell out of the sky in pieces. A wave, 15 feet high, rose out of the slip and rolled across the harbor. It lifted a steel barge bodily out of the water and dropped it on the shore 100 feet away. As the wave receded, it pulled bodies, the living and the dead, back into the bay. 15 miles away in Galveston, plate glass windows shattered. In Houston, 40 miles north, people felt the shock in the soles of their feet. The sound of the blast was heard 150 miles away in Port Arthur and beyond. The mushroom cloud was visible from 100 miles. Seismographs as far away as Denver registered the event. The Grand Camp's anchor, weighing somewhere over 3,000 pounds, traveled 1.5 miles before it landed. It punched a 10-foot crater into the earth. It is still there, in the crater it made, mounted in a memorial park in Texas City. That was the first explosion. Across the slip, the High Flyer was burning. She had been hit by burning debris and broken from her moorings by the blast. She had drifted across the harbor and come to rest against another freighter, the SS Wilson B. Keene. Her own cargo. The 1,000 tons of ammonium nitrate, the 2,000 tons of sulfur, was heating up under flames her crew couldn't reach. By midday, she was abandoned. By afternoon, she was glowing. For about 15 to 16 hours, the High Flyer burned in the harbor. 2 men boarded her in the afternoon, looking for survivors, and reported the cargo was on fire. The message went unheeded for hours. By evening, tugboats were finally dispatched to pull her out into open water. Her hull was tangled in wreckage. Her engines wouldn't restart. Even after her anchor chain was cut, she would not move. Survivors of the morning's blast were searching the ruins of the Monsanto plant. Off-duty firefighters from neighboring towns had arrived to help. People were carrying out wounded, identifying bodies, trying to find missing relatives. The harbor itself, where the High Flyer was visibly burning brighter every hour, was not evacuated until close to midnight. At 10 minutes past 1 in the morning on April 17th, the High Flyer detonated. The second blast was, by some witness accounts, more powerful than the first. Casualties were lower because the docks had finally been cleared, but the blast ignited oil tanks all along the waterfront, which would burn for the better part of a week. It threw the High Flyer's propeller, a piece of bronze weighing several tons, into a field nearly a half-mile away. The propeller is also still there, now part of the same memorial. By the time the fires were finally controlled, the official death count had climbed into the hundreds. Hundreds more were missing, bodies later recovered from the rubble, from the bay, sometimes blown so far from the docks that no one could match them to a name. The official figure settled at 581. The anchor monument lists 576 known dead, of whom only 398 were ever identified. There was no one left in the Texas City Volunteer Fire Department. In the months and years that followed, two things shaped how this story would be remembered. The first was the lawsuits. 8,485 separate claims were filed against the federal government by widows, by injured workers, by businesses wiped out in a single morning. They were eventually consolidated into a class action under the Federal Tort Claims Act of 1946. It was the first such class action ever brought against the United States. The case took the lead plaintiff's name, Dalehite versus United States. The argument the plaintiffs made was direct. The ammonium nitrate had been manufactured at federal ordnance plants. It had been shipped under federal contracts. The bagging specifications, the loading procedures, the maximum allowable temperature, the warning labels or absence of warning labels had all been set by federal agencies, written into government plans, signed off by Army ordnance. And during the discovery phase, internal documents surfaced that had not been public before. The War Production Board had begun a series of tests during the war into the explosion and fire hazards of FGAN. The tests had been terminated at an intermediate stage, against the recommendation of the laboratory conducting them before the most dangerous combinations could be ruled out. One plant captain had written to his superiors asking for a maximum loading temperature to prevent bag deterioration. He was told it was a matter of process control, not a specification, not a warning. The bags went out marked simply as fertilizer, ammonium nitrate, 32.5% nitrogen. The bills of lading described the cargo as fertilizing compounds in paper bags. Nothing said explosive. A federal district judge ruled for the plaintiffs in 1950. The Fifth Circuit reversed him. In 1953, by a 4-3 vote, the Supreme Court agreed with the Fifth Circuit. The majority found that the government's actions fell under the discretionary function exception of the Federal Tort Claims Act. The decisions about how to manufacture, label, and ship FGACAN were policy choices, the court said. Policy choices were immune from suit. Whether those choices had been negligent, the majority wrote, was not the question before the court. Justice Robert Jackson dissented, joined by Justices Black and Frankfurter. He wrote that the ruling left the surviving families with no remedy at all. He called it a man-made disaster caused by forces set in motion and controlled by the government itself. 2 years later, Congress quietly passed a special bill, the Texas City Disaster Relief Act, and paid out roughly $16.5 million in compensation to surviving claimants. There was no admission of fault, just the money. The second thing was the official cause. After months of testimony, the Coast Guard's Board of Investigation listed the most likely source of the original fire as a discarded cigarette in the cargo hold. The exact ignition point was never confirmed. To this day, in the official record, the cause remains undetermined. The crater where the Grand Camp's anchor came down is still there. It's a small park now. Low grass, a stone marker, a list of names that everyone agrees is incomplete. The anchor sits in the middle of it, painted black, 3¼ tons of iron resting where it landed in 1947. Children climb on it. The Texas City Volunteer Fire Department was rebuilt. The Monsanto plant came back within a year. By the early 1950s, the port itself was running again. Ammonium nitrate ships kept docking at Texas City for years afterward, under tighter rules and with warning placards. New federal regulations followed on bagging, on storage, on shipboard fire response. They came directly out of what the Dalehite discovery process had forced into the open. They sit in the case file, in the National Archives, where they have always been technically available. The story was never hidden. It was just buried under sovereign immunity, technical language, and a country in a hurry to move on. What we have is a court record and a death toll. What we don't have is most of the names of the dead, accurately spelled, gathered in any single place. The rest of the lives that ended at 9:12 on the morning of April 16, 1947, those are not in any record at all. If this story stays with you for a while, that's the point. Thanks for watching.